So now I am going to share with you the story The Ebony Horse. In Persia, a king named Sabor has three beautiful daughters and a handsome son named Kamar al-Akmar. On 2 days of the year, the king holds a special feast at which he invites men to come before him with exciting gifts. One year, 3 men show up and present their gifts, and one of them is a Persian inventor and a sorcerer. He shows a king a wooden horse made of ebony which he claims can fly. This remarkable horse can cover in 1 day the same distance an ordinary horse can cover in a year. When the Persian demonstrates how it works, the king is impressed and gives the Persian his most beautiful daughter as a bride. But when the daughter sees how ugly and old her husband to be, she cries and hides away in her bed chamber. Her brother, the handsome prince, asks her what's wrong, and when he learns of her unhappiness, he goes to intervene, asking his father not to marry her sister to the Persian. But when the prince sees the ebony horse, he is interested in how it works. So the wealthy Persian tells him to climb on it and try it out. He shows him the button to press in order to make the horse fly, but doesn't tell him which button will enable the horse to land. And so the prince flies up higher into the sky. Nevertheless, to say the king isn't too pleased with his only son being tricked in this way. So he promptly throws the Persian in prison. Meanwhile, the prince, high up in the sky, manages to figure out which button which make the horse land, and he finds himself in a distant land in the city of Sana'a. Landing the horse on the roof of the royal palace, he climbs down and into a bed chamber where the king's daughter is asleep. It just so happens that she likes the prince's sister. She likes to marry a hideous man she doesn't like. But when she claps eyes on the prince, she falls in love with him and he with her. Unfortunately, the servants of the palace think the prince must be a genie or sorcerer, as he managed to make it past the guards and into the prince's private chamber. The king doesn't trust him, so the prince says he will prove his mettle by facing the king's best man in a fight the next day. But before the fight can take place, he sends for his horse from the roof of the palace, insisting that he will ride it into the battle against the king's soldiers. But once he has mounted the ebony horse, he promptly flies off, leaving everyone thinking he must be a magician or a genie. Arriving back home, the prince is greeted with joy by his father, who feared that his son had lost to him forever. The king orders the release of all prisoners in the city, including the Persian who invented the ebony horse. But the prince misses the beautiful princess he left behind in Sana'a. So he mounts the horse again and flies back to her, carrying her back home with him so that they can be married. But when they arrive and the preparations of their wedding are underway, the cunning Persian takes the horse and abducts the prince's bride-to-be on it. flying her away with him. When they arrive in a foreign land, they are apprehended and the Persian thrown in another prison. When the princess tells them she has been kidnapped by him, she then falls ill with shock and heartbreak over being separated from her beloved. The prince scours the surrounding lands for the princess and eventually overhears some men describing a pair of people whose description matched the Persian and the princess. But in searching for his beloved, he attracts the suspicions of the guards, who have him thrown into the jail as well. There, he gets talking to the Persian who doesn't recognize the prince in the dark, and learns that the princess has fallen ill and the king is trying to cure her, having taken a shine to her himself. And the prince hatches a plan to get them both out of the kingdom and back home. When he is presented before the king who has imprisoned them all, the prince tells him that he is a healer who can help to heal the princess. To do so, he must go to her and examine her. While doing so, the prince whispers his plan in the princess' ear, and she agrees to play along. When the prince asks the king to send the ebony horse to him so that he can banish the devil from it, the king is happy to oblige. But as soon as the prince has mounted the horse and pulled the princess onto it as well, he presses the button and they both ride off into the sky, leaving the king to stamp his feet at having been tricked. Arriving back in his homeland, the prince promptly marries the princess, and they lived happily ever after. The king, his father, destroys the ebony horse so that nobody can ever fly it again. The prince writes to his bride's father in Sana'a to tell him his daughter is married, and the king writes back from the Sana'a with his blessings, sending the married couples gifts. Eventually, the prince succeeds his father as king, and he and his wife rule justly for many years. And that's the story. Thank you for listening. Anong naman, Bungo?